Clara, thank you for agreeing to be part of our class this semester at UC. Um, I asked you a few weeks ago if you'd be willing to sit down with me and do this, and reluctantly you said yes. This isn't your favorite thing to do, so I really appreciate you sharing your gardening story with us. So this class is horticulture technology. It's the first course that most horticulture students take at UC, or one of the first courses. And I really want to focus this whole course on the power of the passion of horticulture. I think sometimes we get lost in the business aspect of it or the academic part of it, but there's a passion part of horticulture that often can get lost with all the other stuff. So I've got a series of questions that I shared with you, and I just kind of want to run through them and have you share your gardening experience with our class. So how long have you been gardening, and what piqued your interest initially?
Okay, I think I've been gardening close to 60 years, probably, between 55 and 60. I was raised on a farm, and I hated that. Mostly I hoed tobacco, and I hated all that. So, and I wanted to be a city girl and see the bright lights and go to plays and all those kind of things. So I would have never thought I'd do gardening. So my husband and I were married in 1960, and we bought this house in 1962, and we were left with pretty much of a big mess. I mean, you know, we put in our own lawn. We bought 4 trees, which none of them are here now. But we had a site that the construction people left in the back. It was just like a big pit, and so we decided to make a rock garden, which we knew nothing about. But probably the big thing that a couple years in like 1962, my mother, who was a very good gardener, took me to a lady's house who had a beautiful garden. She was a flower show judge for roses. She gave us Lamb's Ear and Vinca, and she gave me 2 magazines, Wayside Gardens and White Flower Farm. And since I had nothing else to do, I spent the winter reading those, and I decided I really liked the names of those flowers, and I really thought I'd like to have some. So we just filled in the big pit, and Charlie brought in a lot of big rocks and things, and we started putting plants in that we knew nothing about. I mean, you know, I wouldn't have been surprised if I put an azalea back in the rock garden thinking it would do well. And so we just brought a few plants along and had our children, raised our family. And it reminds me much of this time, because in the 70s, all of a sudden, everybody wanted to get into gardening. And my friend that I'd been a room mother at school with her, and she wanted me to join the garden club. When I was so scared, I was sure I couldn't. I thought they knew everything, and I didn't know a thing. When I got there, they were very nice people. But I fell in love with the speakers who would come, and as I've often said, when everybody else was running around getting the cookies and tea, I was pestering the speakers. And the more I heard, the more one lady talked on ferns, and I found out that all those brown dots on the back of the leaves that I'd been pulling off were spores. I thought that they were diseased. So anyhow, it kind of grew from there. And I would say in the 70s, the Daylily Society was formed, the Hosta Society. The first one, of course, was the Dwarf Conifer Society. And so we just started joining everything. And we found that it was something that we both loved. And so we started doing that, and then we started going to the Hosta conventions. That was a big learning experience. I mean, you heard better speakers, you know, more advanced speakers, and you had wonderful times. So we did that, and there were just some times. One of the best things I ever did was join the Perennial Plant Association and meeting Tony Avent.
Yeah,
I'd like to tell that story about, you know, the first time I ever saw him was down in Raleigh, and he was so hot looking, and he was young, and he had this t-shirt that said "Grow Damn It," and you just could not like him. And when I think what he is now, and what Plants Delight is now, and what it was like when he, when he started out, one hoop house, and just a nice guy with a wonderful wife.
Yes. I remember the first time I met Tony. I was visiting Hoffman Nursery with John Hoffman, and
Yeah.
he took us out to lunch, Tony and I and John, and I can't repeat on camera some of the things that Tony said. Very colorful individual,
Yes.
but when I think of passion about plants,
Oh.
his name is one of the first names that comes up. So just
Can
really.
I tell the story about the money? Have I told you that
Oh
story?
no, I haven't heard this story.
Okay.
This is great.
Well, as I've told you, we went on this trip
Yep.
in 1995, and that was really the big change for me.
Mhm.
And we got back to his house, and everybody was buying plants and stuff. And somebody mentioned the clothesline right behind us had money hanging from it. And somebody asked Michelle, his wife, who we love,
Yeah. Sweetheart.
why is that money there? And she said, oh, J.C. Ralston said that we'll never make money with a mail order nursery, so we're just tell everybody we launder money. I mean, it was so them, you know.
Well,
but that was a change. I mean, that
Yeah.
trip really changed my life.
I took a student years ago. We went down and visited Tony's place, like in the last 3 years, and J.C. Ralston would be pleased at what Tony's done.
Isn't that the truth?
It's an amazing place.
Yes.
He's done a great job.
Yeah.
So describe how you started your first plant collecting garden. One of the things that I'll give a little background to the students who've not seen your garden. You're a collector first. I think that's your first, like when I think of Clara Berger, I think of plant collector. That's what you do, that's your passion. So describe how you started that first plant collection, because you get obsessed with things and you have to have, hosta or daylilies.
10 of them.
Right, 10 of them, and 10 different ones. And then also, what part of kind of being a collector helped you solidify your love of plants?
Well, I would say probably our first big love, we joined the dwarf conifer first, but that's okay, but that's not really where my love is. But daylilies, we became obsessed with daylilies, and we became obsessed with hostas, and you just had to have everything. Yeah. And then, of course, if you bought a hosta, you had to have something else to go around it, so then you started with that, and I don't know, it's just kind of a spin-off. You read about it, or you hear it, or visiting so many gardens, you see plants, and you think, oh, and I remember being at the Civic Garden Center for plant sale that my friend and I were helping in the shade place, and somebody brought in a piece of arum, and we had to have it, and I happened to have a mentor who was a really nice lady, and she said, oh, I have that, and so she brought us some, and
Yeah.
maybe you'd like to say why we don't like it anymore.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And you can't get rid of it.
And you can't get rid of it, but I'm gaining on it. I have found rocks do keep it down.
Yeah.
You can't get up through the rocks,
Yeah.
so that's working. I think we've gotten rid of some.
Yes.
But
that's awesome.
and so sometimes I've collected. We collected Houtinii.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't collect it. We bought a plant,
Yep.
but it wasn't very long that we realized. So we built this whole 4-foot mound back there. It's just to cover up the Houtinii.
Really?
And occasionally it would still come out the sides.
My
until
goodness.
a couple of years ago.
My brother and I were on a job site years ago, and they had planted that Houtinii, and he brought a bobcat in and scooped up 12 inches of soil to put new soil back in. It still came back in places. It's just an incredibly resilient plant.
Yeah, I know 2 gardens that still have it. They're completely overrun with it.
I remember when that first hit the trade, I was working at the zoo, and I planted 5 plants down in jungle trails as a ground cover. I think most of it died, thank God.
Yeah.
But again, that's just one of those things that you
One
learn.
of the things you learn about invasive plants.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've sure had my share of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. How did others with a horticulture interest kind of fuel your interest in horticulture?
You mean other people?
Yeah, other people. Because I don't know.
Well, yes.
My interest in this has come and gone over the 27 years I've done it, and being around people like you, it keeps it interesting.
When we started getting into the societies, we had it really did change our life, because you start, they say if you want to be a gardener, you have to hang around with gardeners, and so we started. We had our friends that we liked, in the gardens, and you really move into it. Probably some of the best times we ever had. And you remember Pat kept, was she the first horticulturist?
She was the first horticulturist at the Civic Garden Center, yes.
Yes, and when she was killed in a car accident, and so some of us got to know each other, and we called ourselves the Friends of Pat, the FOP, and we started going to conventions together. We had wonderful times, and you just, and of course some of these were just people that gardened, and then some were really experts, and you just feed off of each other. You really do.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's what's kept my interest. I mean, I was ready to hang it up a few years ago, just frustrated with career, and you called me, and now I love plants again. It's like, it's amazing how that works. You just get around somebody, and then you remember why you love it.
I probably wouldn't be here if you hadn't said yes. You wanted to work. So.
We both won on this one.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I know we did. I did.
I certainly did too. No doubt. So, who are some of the most influential gardeners or horticulturists that you've met?
In gardening?
Yeah, in gardening. You mentioned Tony Avent, that's one.
Yeah, Tony. Oh gosh. Oh, well, I'll tell you one that I said I would follow any place was Marco Stefano from Wave Hill.
Definitely.
And a lot of those that I know are the bigger gardens, like Chanticleer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of my favorite gardens on earth. And Marco Stefano, he's with Wave Hill in New York, and I mean, he's just a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And we met a lot of people, nursery owners.
Yeah.
And designers. A good friend of Tony and Michelle's with Edith Edelman, and she had a connection with the Cincinnati Nature Center. She came here to give talks and stayed with us. That was one thing that one of the best things we did. We were always willing to host people when they came in town, and we met some wonderful people that way.
So thinking of those people, what are some of the things that you noticed about them that you feel made them great horticulturists or great hobbyists? Even you're more of a hobbyist, and that's not to diminish your knowledge of plants.
I am, yeah.
But what are some of the attributes of those people that you hung out around that you noticed that made them really good plants people? Like, what are some of the things they did or the way they thought?
Well, first of all, they were nice people.
Yeah,
everybody's nice people.
Yeah.
And you started talking about gardening, and it's like you just always knew each other, and you often liked the same kind of things, or whatever, or maybe you had something that I had never seen before, and we would talk about that.
Yeah.
But you always knew that gardening was their passion in their life, and that's what it becomes.
Yeah.
If you have the passion, you're going to garden.
Yeah. It's more than a job, I think.
Yes.
And that's a great segue. What you just said is a great segue into the next question that I have. And the reason I threw this in here is really because of you. It wasn't until I started working with you almost 6 years ago now that I really began to understand on a deeper level the difference between gardening and landscaping. So how would you describe that difference?
Well, in the old days, we were very condescending about the landscapers.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't know plants. They don't know perennials. You know, they just really don't know. All they know is lines.
Yeah.
And I think it's come a long way since then.
Definitely.
I think you've brought some people here that were urban planners. I think that's a great thing. You know, I mean, I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But you know, I think when I plant something, it doesn't have to be something that's so wonderful looking that it's going to catch everybody's eye.
Right.
Which now that's what I'm trying to do.
Right. Right.
But in the old days, I would just plant anything, any place there was a hole, and
put it in.
And we had a disagreement there. Charlie always wanted he liked brown earth, and I want the ground covered. So
yes.
So we just would push back and forth on those kind of things. But
I think you ultimately won. There's not much brown earth in this garden.
No, not anymore.
And if there is, it's not brown earth very long.
No, but I'll find a plant for
That's
it.
That's right.
But what was it I read the other day, that gardening is trying to bring the beauty of nature into your life. And you know, it's just something you do. It becomes part of you. It's a passion you have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a passion.
Yeah.
I mean, so I wouldn't ever want to be anything. I am so thankful that my life turned out the way it did.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't ask for more. So.
And that's also a good segue into something else that I think, unfortunately, has a potential or tends to derail people's love of horticulture and gardening. The whole concept of invasive plants, it's almost like there's factions of people that are developing, like, well, we're native only, or oh, you can't plant a plant that's more than 200 miles from this location radius. What are your thoughts on that?
My thought is you shouldn't get yourself into a niche. Now, it's not. There's nothing wrong with being an expert in a niche. I'm sure.
Right.
But you know, and I'm sure I've told you this about when we bought this. It hadn't been farmed for it hadn't been farmed for 27 years
Yeah.
or 30 years. And the neighbor behind us, when he met us, he said, "I'm so glad you know, bought the land," because he said it hasn't been anything but a weed patch for all that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now those were probably native plants.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that I don't like native plants.
Right.
But I think that's tunnel vision if you're trying to make
Yeah.
the world into native plants. Everything was a native someplace, and
Yes.
we were all native someplace. You know,
Yes.
our ancestors came here, and so do the plants.
Well,
And-
and I think too, there has to be some rationality applied to that. I mean, if you plant something here, it's not going to escape and overrun the Smoky Mountains. You know what I mean? It's like
Exactly.
we're in a neighborhood. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
right.
it's
And if I couldn't plant anything, I have to say truthfully, if I couldn't plant anything but native plants, it would be so boring. Why would I want to?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, 'cause
I'm not condemning anybody that does it.
No.
But my field's a little broader than that. I think.
Yeah, and mine is too. I you know, I was trained as a plant ecologist, so
Mhm.
I do understand the
Right.
danger of invasive plants.
Exactly.
But I think it has to be peppered with some
Mm-hmm.
reason, because
Rationale.
again, it's not.
Yeah.
It's here. It's not
Yeah.
going to be a problem here. So, what are some of the things, you know, for the people watching this? You have a tremendous plant knowledge. I know you don't think you have a tremendous plant knowledge, but you really do. You're definitely one of the top 5 horticulturists that I know. I've never said that to you, and I know you don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. You're as far as a plants woman, you're the. What are the things that you do to keep expanding your knowledge?
Well, the sign over there that says, if you have a library and a garden, you have everything you need applies to me. When I went to a doctor recently, she asked me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I garden and I read. That's what I do." And I do think, and I would really stress this, because as I think I wrote to you, I used to get everything was catalogs. That is so different now.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have the internet, and
Right.
so you had to get a catalog.
Yeah.
If you wanted anything that they weren't selling at the nursery because there was no Lowe's and Home Depot,
Right.
you had to send for it.
Yeah.
And if you sent for those, and I sent for everyone I could get my hands on, you had to know Latin names or you couldn't tell what you were looking for. There were
Right.
no common names in those books.
Right.
Thank God.
Right.
And I learned botanical names early on.
Yeah.
And families, and just so much, you know, about that. And the other thing I think I've told you was my friend, the library opened right across the street. So there's the reading.
Yeah.
And I really seriously did do nothing but read. When I decided that gardening was going to be the rest of my life, I decided I needed to know more. And
Yeah.
I did read for 15 years.
Yeah.
Nothing but gardening books.
Yeah.
My friend who was the head librarian became a good friend, and she said that every library has a focus. You know, if you love Ireland and you're the head librarian, you'll buy a lot of books on on Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
She happened to have an interest in gardening, so she brought all the gardening books. Pretty soon she'd bring me the list and say, which ones do we want, you know.
Wow.
And I can say that, she's not here anymore.
Right.
But anyhow, that really did help.
Yeah.
And to this day, I mean, I have favorite gardens that I follow.
Yes.
There's a man named Jimmy Blake in Ireland that I would never miss him on Facebook. Now, having said that, I'm really a Facebook stalker. I would never put out anything on Facebook, but
Me
I
too.
have a lot of people that I do follow,
Yeah.
and you just learn a lot.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
I'm so encouraged. The New York Times now has a really good garden writer named Margaret Roach. And for years we haven't had any gardeners.
Yeah.
I mean, any garden
Yeah,
writers.
it's true.
Nobody reads the newspaper anyhow.
The last one we had here in Cincinnati was probably Tim Morehouse.
Who was my best friend?
Yeah, Tim was he was great. I
Yes,
loved him.
I did too.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Yeah.
And we went. He knew the good garden tour people.
Yep.
And we went to Ireland and Scotland with him and had a wonderful time.
I think you just hit on something that I think I would encourage the students or young people who are just getting into horticulture. You got to find that network of people because gardens like yours, when you drive by your house on State Road, you don't know this is here.
Yeah. That's
And there's a
always been
whole
plus
lot
side.
of there's a whole lot of other gardens around that are like that.
Exactly.
And finding that network of people, you know, like the Jean Bears and people like that just have these, the Beth Carts who have these
I'm not
phenomenal
sure.
gardens.
Well, and I think probably, I think the zoo has done such a great. I've
absolutely.
seen that grow,
Yes.
and it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But you really do need to get in. I don't know what do they don't really have societies now, do they?
I think enrollment attendance has really waned. I just don't. I think
Evidently the nature center has.
the nature
very
centers.
good
I think they're doing a
volunteer
good job. But as far as like the old, when I think of like the Herb Society, you know, like Sandy Manteufels, the Sue Brungs, those people, they're just not. It's not like that now. It's not. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just different. It's
Well, and I do think the Herb Society, that was one of the best passages. I call
Yeah.
these passages.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
one of the best I had.
Yeah.
That's when Sue and I started taking trips.
Yes.
And that's how I found Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And like I said, I would love to come back to my next life in Brandywine, Pennsylvania, in that area, because there's so many good gardeners there.
Well, when
And-
I worked at the Civic Garden Center, I worked with a group of volunteers. They called themselves the Dirt Crew, and
Yes.
about 2-3 years after working there, they were gracious enough to plan a trip every year and take me.
I remember
and-
Judy.
Judy Graves, Dan Zirkle, and it wasn't until I started seeing gardens other places
Right.
that I start realizing
Right.
this is a big industry. This is a big hobby. It's a big vocation or avocation, whichever you choose. And there's a lot out there to see. And without seeing it, you can't really.
You
You can't
don't
really
know
know.
what you're missing if you don't see
No.
it.
The last couple.
And as I said, if when I started, my big thing was I was going to have every plant there was. I thought I could do that.
Yeah, right.
And when I came to realize that in 3 lifetimes you wouldn't know everything you need to know about gardening, and I thought I'm hooked for life. And
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was very focused on it.
Well, I
So-
think that's something that you've talked about with me a lot of times. It never stops.
No, it doesn't.
You're not going to get bored with it, because there's always
The only
something new
thing
to
is
do.
my notebook is getting so big. I keep writing down, try this, try that,
Yeah.
try the other thing. And okay, and I go ahead.
No, this is great. It's a great segue into the next question. So how has your interest in collecting plants changed over the years? Because it has changed.
Yes, it has. And I think part of that now is that I really, I see that now that I see my yard and gardens, I see things I want to improve. And now it's all about painting pretty pictures. And I've used this quote a lot, that what Beth Chatto said about everybody's an artist in their own garden. And I think that's what I'm more interested in now. It's just making things that look pretty together.
Yeah.
And but they're just now. In the old days, you know, there wasn't so much. Every year there's so much new stuff.
Yes.
And it's really hard to pick out what you want to
Yeah.
concentrate on. So now it's more that I'm looking at areas,
Yeah.
and I think, oh, if we added this and something else,
Yeah.
it would look better. But I don't have quite as much of a tendency to buy 12 different things of one.
Yes.
One
You're more
thing.
selective now.
I'm more selective. Yes,
Yeah.
that would be, and that's because you taught me to. I call it training the eye. You
Yeah.
have to train your eye to see what's there. They used to talk about Rosemary Beery. Whenever she went to a garden, she had a little notebook and a pencil. And I mean, she was so famous, and she helped Prince Charles do his garden and everything.
Oh, wow.
But she, no matter where she went, she wrote what she liked and what she didn't like about
Wow.
the garden.
Well, that's one thing I've learned working with you the last 6 years. In your house, you've got your room and you've got your table in the kitchen that you spend a lot of time in,
Oh, boy, yeah.
and your bedroom.
Yeah.
And that has really impacted how I look at the space too, because when I'm working in the yard, in the garden, I'm imagining that line of sight.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
And that's
Thank
what
you.
and that has been helpful, because I think it gets lost a lot of times. It's one thing to draw a pretty picture on a design, it's another thing to create a pretty garden.
Well, and I want to say too, like my son lives here, and he never cared about, none of my kids, I have 4 kids and none of them care about the garden. Thank God I have a wonderful daughter-in-law who loves the garden. Anyhow, he lives here and he could care less, but he sits at the kitchen table and looks out, and I can tell that he really enjoys the view.
But he's a photographer, so
yes, and
he's
he's
got
a
that
photographer,
eye.
so that does help too. But I mean, I think even if you don't think you care about plants at all, a nice scene does really change you. It makes you feel better.
So this is kind of a fun question. What are some of the plant crazes that you enjoyed the most? Because you've been through a lot of them.
Oh gosh. Well, daylilies were so wonderful until we found out that the roots on them crawl away, and pretty soon you have things blooming and you don't know what they are.
Yeah.
When I did daffodils, there's a thing called bulb fly. I never had it, but it really scared me. Hostas, we went through southern, what was that called?
Southern blight.
Southern blight.
Yeah.
And I had to get out the hydrogen peroxide and pour it on, and then put the merit around them to keep them clean. And, a lot of those things, it was they were plant crazes, but then they got to be just too much.
Yeah.
It's like, do I really want to spend my life trying to keep these daylilies separate and everything?
Right.
And I'm trying to think what else was really crazy. I don't know. What do you remember? Do you?
I think you hit all the ones that I remember. Daffodils, daylilies, and hosta. Herbs were pretty crazy there for a little while.
Oh, yes. Well, that was one thing. I was very fortunate, and people don't realize this, so I'll tell your students this. The first herb meeting was up in Lebanon, Ohio in 1987.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of us went to it. In 1988, they had their first convention out in Indianapolis. And I swear, if it wasn't for the international herb growers, you would not have the diversity of food that you have today.
Yeah.
For instance, Celestial Tea, I just toured that back this January. He was an herbie.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I met 2 of the dearest friends in my life through the International Herb Society. And the poor woman who really brought it all to the fore, no one even remembers her name. So, but I learned a lot from that.
Yes.
And Sandy Manteufel,
Definitely.
the Cincinnati Herb Society, she has stuck with that, and they're doing a project. Did you know this at Spring Grove?
I heard something about that. That's awesome. I know when I was at the Civic Garden Center, Sandy and I built the herb garden, or the 2/3 of the herb garden at the Civic Garden Center. Her husband, Dick, was a muckety-muck at Turner Construction, I think.
Yeah, one of those.
Yeah, and he sent a Turner Special Projects group over for about a month, and Sandy and I worked together. Another incredible plants woman.
And it always made me feel good when we've had our sales in the spring with the vendors.
Yes.
She would bring those scented geraniums, and I would always try to make sure she talked to young people.
Yes.
Because they had no idea what a scented geranium
Nope.
And she sent some this spring. She didn't come to.
Yeah.
But
Why does horticulture matter? Why is it important?
oh gosh, how do you answer that?
Yeah.
It's so needed. We certainly, you have to learn how to take care of the earth for one thing, and I do believe in climate change. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen it here.
Absolutely.
It used to be we'd have soft, beautiful rains, and now they run off and they don't sink in.
Yeah.
And
It's
this
different.
humidity is killing me.
Yeah.
But I think in the old days, evidently, well, in the old days, everybody grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
it wasn't unusual to be growing up on a farm, and you learned about it. You at least learned what
Yes.
the world was about.
Yes.
And I heard Meg Wessel say that back in the early 1900s, they taught horticulture in school.
Wow.
And the teacher would go home and you had to grow a garden, and they would go home and grade your garden.
Wow.
And
Different
can
times
you
now.
imagine that now?
Yeah.
So, but I do think we really need, particularly my grandchildren are spending so much time on screens.
Yeah.
I know that they need to
Yeah.
be around gardening. And bless their mother's heart, she raised beans and lettuce this year. So.
Wow. Good. Good. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
You know,
Somebody's got to start somewhere.
You know, knowing that we were going to talk about this, I've reflected a lot on how I got interested in horticulture, and it was, you know, my grandfather who took me hunting. He knew all the trees.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he grew up running hills and mountains in Jellicoe, in Tennessee.
Yeah.
My other grandfather was an Irish immigrant, and he loved annuals. And every year it was ageratum, red geraniums, and white petunias, because he was also very patriotic, because he was a veteran of World War II, and he was very proud to come to America. And
one of my very earliest memories was going to a nursery with my mother to get pansies. That's a pretty good memory to have.
Wow.
I don't even remember where or anything.
Wow.
But it was a nice memory.
That is. So, how has collecting plants enriched your life? I think you've hit on some of that, but if you had to kind of distill that down into one thought, what's it done for you?
Well, I would have to say it's given me a wonderful life. I've met the nicest people that you'd ever want to meet. I have something that makes me want to get up every day and do more of it.
Yeah.
and I'm always planning ahead.
Yeah.
Which is kind of better than being bitter and depressed and everything else.
Absolutely,
so
for sure.
It's always something to look ahead to.
Well, you enrich others' lives by sharing plants with them. I looked through my plant record that I have in Excel, and I would say 2/3 of my garden came from this garden. And that's the truth.
I'm glad about that.
What role has sharing plants with other people? Because I think that's a big piece.
My
I'm at a
gosh.
point now where I can do the same for others. And it does something for me that I can't really put into words, but I'm just curious how you feel about that.
My garden is what they talk about is a friendship garden. When I walk through, there's Pat's garden, there's Gil's garden.
Yeah.
People that shared plants, that shared wonderful times.
Yeah.
It's just when you walk through your garden and you see and you remember who this came from, or that you gave so and so some of this. It's just it really is I think the thing you have if you get into gardening is you have good earth values.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think I know any really nasty people that garden. I mean, I do think it's a positive thing for humanity to be interested in the earth and the things that grow.
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm in my garden, it takes my focus off of me, if you know what I mean.
My doctor told me one time there was a war, the 6-day war, this was many years ago, and I was very upset to hear the news. And my doctor said, "Go outside, get away from it.
Yeah.
You know, and just take your mind off of it for a while." And sometimes that does help.
Go outside. Wow.
Yeah, go outside. Yeah.
So, where do you think horticulture is going?
Well, if you'd asked me last year, I would have been pretty depressed. But this year, I'm thrilled that everybody seems to be into it. A lot of people seem to know. And I've told you this before about my one grandson saying that he couldn't see any use in going for horticulture because he wouldn't even make enough to pay off his college loan.
Right.
But I do think there's so many jobs, and I think this is just spinning into more and more fields that you can go into. So many things. And I do think probably that the wages have to increase.
Yes.
But I mean, it just seems like there is so much.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone considering going into horticulture?
Get out and see the world. See as much, kind of concentrate. And you can see the world on the internet. It's all there. It's
true.
You can find, just start looking for gardens.
Yeah.
And I will say that I have a very English bent. I'm German, but I have a very English bent to what I look at. I mean,
Yes.
although I know there's really good gardens in Germany now too.
Yes.
All over Europe,
Yeah.
there's wonderful gardens.
Yes.
But just try and find some gardens and listen to people.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And my friend Ann and I, we used to just follow people that we heard about that had a garden.
Yeah.
And ask if we could come visit.
Isn't that something? I've taken, it's been a couple years ago now, but I've taken groups of UC students to North Carolina and Chicago. And
Yeah.
I called Ball Seed, Jim Now, and he's like, of course you can bring a class up here. I would love to show them the garden.
See, and I do think that's true. I think people that are in gardening would love to share it with younger people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, and I think if you have the interest, you can just see a lot.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions here. What's kept you gardening all these years?
Just because I wanted to get up and see what was out there, and pull those weeds.
Yeah.
I had to get up every day and pull those weeds, and and of course then in the spring there's always something new to plant and try that you haven't heard about before, and sharing with friends. That's more than anything.
Just never gets old.
No, it never wears out, ever.
So what's next in the garden here?
Painting pretty pictures.
Nice.
You asked me the other week to try and figure out 3 gardens that I wanted to improve on, and I've just about got most of them ready.
Good, good.
Knowing what we need to put into them. I may have, and the thing is, then you have to do research.
Yes.
Because so you have a plant you think that would work well. Well, will it live there?
Right.
Is there too much shade? Is it too dry? Is it too wet? So there's always, it's just a learning experience.
Well, that's all I've got. This has been great. I've learned more today than I've known about you for 6 years. Although I did meet you a long time ago at Civic Garden Center. But man, I am so grateful that you called me that day and said, hey, I need a gardener.
Oh.
And then you told me.
And I said, I can't afford you. I knew that he was way out of my class.
And I told you don't know how cheap I am. Well, this has been a heck of a journey for me. I love it. I'm going to turn 50 in January, and I was encouraged when you told me today that I've got at least 20 more years of this to do.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, or 30.
Yeah, hopefully.
But you can't move those rocks.
Yeah, I got to get those
80,
rocks this year, right?
Yeah,
got to do that
get
now.
Those rocks now. So.
But thank you, Clara. I really appreciate you sharing your love.
Listen, you made it easy.
Good.
I was very worried about this, as you know.
Yes.
But you made it very easy.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.